Welcome to Election Recon. It is episode 4 of our full-length 1-hour episodes here on Saturday nights. We're excited to have you join us tonight where it is 8:30 p.m. on the west coast of these states united, and it is Saturday, October 17th, 2020, 17 days until Election Day here in America. And again, as I said, thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight's show going to be more about our model. We've been promising to break down our model, how we're getting to these ratings and projections and predictions, a little bit more in our methodology and our ways of doing it behind the scenes. We're going to break that down for you in today's show. We've been promising it, and tonight we will deliver. So those of you who have been asking for it and waiting for it, tonight's the night where we're going to break into that. Our special guest tonight will be beat reporter for the Turlock Journal, Angelina Martin. Angelina Martin has been covering politics and government for the Turlock Journal now for a couple of years. She was heavily involved in the California 10th Congressional District race in 2018 and is heavily involved again in the California 10th Congressional District race this year in 2020. That race currently in our model as a lean Democrat seat. However, it's a very purple district. The whole Central Valley tends to be very purple. So interesting to get her views. I'm looking forward to getting her views on the ground. We bring you a lot of how it looks at a 30,000 foot level. I'm excited to talk to somebody who's been on the ground covering this crazy election all year long and getting her thoughts about what's going on the ground level. So we look forward to Angelina joining us later tonight. Not a lot of polling to report today. We're going to go right into the state of the race here and get that knocked out. Only 3 polls. Saturdays have been pretty light on the polling. And there's going to be a poll for president, one for Senate, and one for governor. So we're going to go ahead and cover that right now without any hesitation. A state poll for president, this one out of the state of Missouri from the Missouri Scout, has Trump +6, 51-45. A Senate poll out of the state of Michigan from Trafalgar Group, a Republican-affiliated organization, in the race between the Democrat incumbent Senator Peters versus his Republican challenger James +1, 48-47. That race within the margin of error. Out of the governor's poll, also from Missouri, also from the Missouri Scout, in the race between Republican incumbent Governor Parson versus his Democratic challenger Galloway, Parson +8, 51-43. Like I said, that's all the polls that we have for you today. Not a lot of polling again today. Not a lot of data coming from the Secretary of State's or the Registrar of Voters or Target Smart, the 3 sources we use to get voter reg data and early voting data and what's going on with actual objective data on this election. So our model did not shift much today. There are no rating shifts anywhere in the model whatsoever. So the scoreboard is going to pretty much stand as it was last night all the way across the board. We are going to touch here a little bit on, as we do daily, the 538 model. 538 from Nate Silver still actually has the president down 1% more today. Donald Trump now in the 538 model, only 12 in 100 chance to win, or 12% to win re-election. Joe Biden, 87 in 100, or 87% to win. 538 has the projected electoral vote at 347 for Biden, 191 for Trump, and the popular vote projection at 53.6% for Biden, 45.2% for Donald Trump. Now, a lot of you have written in this week complaining that we bring you daily updates from Nate Silver's 538 model and forecast. A lot of you have said, why are we using this? He was wrong in 2016, yada, yada. Why are you so focused on that when your model is different? Even though we are still at this moment in time projecting a Joe Biden win in our model gives a more robust chance for the president, more like a 1 in 3 instead of a 1 in 10 chance that the president is going to win re-election. So those of you on the right have written in complaining that we're using 538. Well, we're doing it for two reasons. One, we're trying to be we say it every week, every podcast. We're trying to be the oasis of reality. We're trying to be that spot where you can come and just get fact-driven, no BS, no bias, no spin. So we're not just going to give you what we think. We're going to tell you what other top prognosticators out there, whether you agree with the guy or agree with 538 or not, this is what he's saying. And he's one of the leading voices, for better or worse, whether you like him or you don't like him in the country, on prognostications. So that's why we're using his model, and his model certainly disagrees with our model, at least in terms of the state of the race and how heavily it's leaning to the left. But we hear you. And to be fair, there have been a couple of you, 2 or 3 of you, who have written in and said, why are we not paying more attention to his model? He is the top guy in the country for these prognostications, according to the media, and how could we not pay more attention to what he has to say? Clearly, I think we're paying attention. We literally give an update of his model every day for you guys. So, to be fair, a little bit of chatter on both sides, a whole lot more chatter on why are we even bringing him up in our podcast. But that's why. But we do hear you, and we have been searching high and low to try and find a counterbalance to the left-leaning projections at the moment of 538's model. So we've landed on a website that I've known about and have followed for quite some time, electionprojection.com. And so we're going to try to appease some of you viewers out there and have a counterbalance to the 538 model. The proprietor of the Election Projection website is a self-professed Christian conservative guy. He tries to just deliver the data and the facts on his model. He doesn't really pontificate too much on his website. He's been pretty successful historically projecting elections. So that's the model we're going to choose to counterbalance 538. And the electionprojection.com, you can check that website out in your free time. They have it at 334 projected electoral votes for Biden, 204 for President Trump. The popular vote projection currently stands tonight 49.7 for Biden, 45.3 for Trump. They do not do an odds to win type of a forecast. I don't think his model simulates who wins. He has just a raw projection for each state. So that being said, a lot of you guys are probably like, well, I thought you just got a counterbalance. How come you're not giving us a model that shows Trump winning? Well, we want the model to have some science, just not opinion, right? And his model has polling and some science behind it. So that's why we chose that model. But despite the electoral vote numbers still being so high for Biden, the difference between the 538 model and the EP model, or the election projection model, is Nate Silver and 538 have all these battleground states as likely Biden, pretty much, or leaning Biden, where the election projection model has it weak Biden. He rates them weak, moderate, strong, and solid, I believe. And so he has them weak, or what we would say at Election Recon, tilt. So the race much closer. Maybe the EV count doesn't show it, but look at his popular vote share. He has Biden. He's the only guy I know out there that has Biden really under 50% in a modeling scenario. So he definitely has the race much closer, and a lot of these states are on the razor's edge, where the 538 model pretty much calling the race right now for the other side. It's pretty much saying there's a 90% chance for a Biden win. So that's the difference between the two models. Enough about those guys. Let's talk about our model and where it stands for the presidency today. Again, there's been no shift. So the Election Recon Predictive Scoreboard will stand at 308 projected electoral votes for Biden-Harris, 230 for Trump-Pence. Our presidential forecast here at Election Recon will stand at 64 in 100, or a 64% chance of victory for Biden, 35 in 100 for re-election for President Trump, and we have it pretty much rounded up to a 1 in 100, or a 1% chance of a 269-269 tie, where logic would dictate in that scenario President Trump would win the tiebreaker of House delegations choosing the next president of the United States. Our share of the popular vote stands at 51% for Joe Biden, 46.8% for Donald Trump. So our model and the election projection model pretty close on the within 1.5% on the popular vote share. So we disagree a little bit, but pretty close with the electoral vote count. I do believe it is the states of Arizona and North Carolina where we have in Trump's column and he has it in Biden's column. And I think that's the difference there in the electoral vote count. So that's where the state of the race is today, this Saturday, for president. We're going to now move to the Senate, where the scoreboard for the Senate will remain 51 projected seats for Democrats, 49 projected seats for Republicans in our model. And moving now to the U.S. House of Representatives, the scoreboard stands at 239 projected seats for Democrats and 196 projected seats for Republicans in the House. Moving to governor's mansions in the United States, the score stands there at 27 projected governor's mansions for Republicans, 23 projected governor's mansions for Democrats. We are not going to update state legislatures tonight because we do believe the model is going to make some adjustments early next week. We are getting new data from state ledge races across some of the states that are close. We don't expect most of the state ledge situation from coast to coast, border to border, is pretty much guaranteed. So that's why the state ledge maps are safe Republican or safe Democrat in over 40 states. There's a very few handful of states where the outcome of who's going to control the legislature in those states at the end of this election is in doubt. But we do have some new data coming in, some internal polls that we're able to get our hands on from different states, and that we're going to factor into our model and adjust that there. So no updates for state legislatures tonight. But again, I just want to remind everybody that these state ledge races are critically important, especially in a census year, because it will be the state legislatures, for the most part, few exceptions nationally, but for the majority of states in the United States, these state legislatures and state governments and governors are going to redraw the legislative districts for House of Representatives and state legislatures across the country once the census count is completed. And that could completely change the balance of power in Congress. Completely. Redistricting every 10 years is a critically important, and every politico, campaign, government bureaucrat, doesn't matter. Anybody in politics knows the importance of redistricting, and voters should as well. So who controls state legislatures across the country is critically important, and that's why we continue to update you on that. So, thank you for allowing me to go through all of that. We're going to go ahead now. I'm told that Miss Angelina Martin is on the phone, so we're going to go ahead and go to Miss Angelina Martin now. And again, she is a beat reporter for the Turlock Journal. She covers government, politics, and agriculture. She's been in the business for a few years now, and it is my distinct honor and privilege to invite on the show and welcome to the Election Recon podcast, Miss Angelina Martin. Angelina, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for asking me. I'm super excited to be on the show tonight.
Well, don't get too excited because I told our listeners in the previous segment that you are indeed a member of the media. You are an adversary.
Cursed media.
Yes, the cursed media indeed. But I think from my side, at least in politics, you guys in the media are often the adversary. I mean, not you, but I mean the media in general is often the adversary. But I think journalism is important, and I do believe that it should be an adversarial role. I think that's an important part for the media to play. And I think too. I think our attitudes, the public's attitudes towards journalism, politically, has become more hostile, and I think they blame journalists a lot for where we are at politically in this country today, but I think it's really the other way around. And I think it's unfair, and I hope that my listeners will treat every journalist as an individual and not paint all journalists with one broad brushstroke, because I really think it's our own political attitudes and where we are as a society that has been the cause of where political journalism is in America today.
Yeah, kind of piggytailing off that, that's one of the downsides of the 24/7 news cycle is they eventually run out of things to talk about, and they kind of start beating a dead horse. Whereas, the community journalism that I try to do, it's informing our readers about what's going on at the local level and tying that into the national issues in a way that they can kind of relate to. So I kind of take pride in that and separating myself from that mainstream media that people have so come to not hate, but, kind of there's a lot of distrust these days.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, but I do need to stop myself and go back because normally my first question is you plugging you. I mean, I gave a little bit about your history, but you work in a town, Turlock, California, which is a small town for us here in California, but relatively speaking to the rest of America, Turlock is probably a moderate to bigger town for most of the country.
Yeah.
But you wear a lot of hats for your publication, as I said. So tell us about Angelina Martin, how you got here, and what it is that you do with the many hats that you wear.
Yeah, so Turlock is a small-ish Central Valley town. It's about 70,000 people as of the last census in 2010. We'll see, what the new numbers are, but yeah, like you said, it's a little big town, people like to call it. And so I work for the Turlock Journal. We publish twice a week, and after the pandemic, we have an editorial staff right now of 4. So that includes, 3 reporters, one of whom does a lot of multimedia and video work for us, and then our editor. And we publish twice a week, so on Wednesdays and Saturdays. And with such a small staff, I cover government, of course, which has to do with a lot of what we're going to talk about today, I assume, agriculture, business, and education. So our school district, and then, what the businesses are up to, and then, what farmers are going through, whether it be legislation or water issues, things like that. And I went to Stanislaus State here in Turlock. I graduated in 2016, started working part-time at the Turlock Journal while I was still finishing up my last year. And then afterward, I got hired full-time at the Journal. And March of 2021 will be 5 years at the Journal. So I love my job. I love working for a community newspaper, and we are now community-owned. We're now owned by 209 Multimedia Corporation, which is owned by our former publisher, Hank Vanderveen, and he actually purchased us from our former parent company, MNC, out of Georgia. So it's new beginnings, locally owned, and we're going to continue to focus on local journalism. That was a long spiel. I'm so sorry.
No, I mean, that was great. Thank you. I think too, there's probably some people who are listening going, you're covering national politics, and you brought this local reporter on, but I just want to make sure I clarify and talk you up a little bit. You may be a local reporter, but you've covered some pretty heavy races. You covered 2016 to be sure, but 2016 in no way here in the Central Valley was as much of a battleground as it was in 2018 when you covered a really contentious, hostile race here in 2018 in the 10th congressional district.
Yeah, it wasn't as polarized, that's for sure.
Most certainly not. Not at least not here locally. I mean, obviously 2016 was polarized, but not here in the Central Valley or the Motherlode area of California. But my point is that you, despite being a local reporter, have national experience, because 2018 was a race where former Congressman Jeff Denham, Republican, was unseated by the current Congressman, freshman Democrat Josh Harder. And I happen to know a little bit about this race because, as you're aware, but our listeners probably are not, at least not a lot of them, I happen to be the losing campaign manager of that race. So, yeah, I mean, I was there. It was just a crazy year. The hostility was just even more than it was in 2016 in politics, especially locally, and it was just crazy. But I saw you. It was you and your editor, pretty much. That's who your paper had. And these bigger publications, they have these huge staffs, and they're kind of lazy and all over the place. But you guys at the Turlock Journal, you and your editor, were everywhere covering this race, and it was. Make no mistake, California 10 was one of the top House races that Democrats were going after to take back control of the House of Representatives. Of course, what they did, and you were there covering the whole thing.
Yeah, when I originally got into journalism, I had my eyes set on sports and maybe, business reporting. But once I got switched over to the government beat and I started following that race was when I really realized how fun it could be to cover a race, especially one like that District 10 race that we saw in 2018.
Stop. Fun is not the word I would use to describe my memory of 2018.
Yeah. If I was on the campaigning side, I'm sure that was the last word I would use to describe it as well. But from a reporter standpoint, I mean, what more could you ask for? It was a tight race. The Turlock Journal held a debate between Josh Harder and Jeff Denham, and sparks flew. That was fun to write about. That was fun to cover. And so, for only my second year on the job, that was a really awesome race to be able to kind of get my feet wet. And now covering District 10 again 2 years later is even more fun almost. So it's an awesome job. And District 10 is, I'm assuming it's going to be this way for quite some time with tight races.
Yeah, I mean, more than likely, because over the last 10 years, from like 2010 to today, so many people have moved out of the Bay Area, which is a liberal bastion in this country. They've moved into the Central Valley and the lower foothills of California because the cost of living is lower. They've become commuters into their jobs, and they've come from a more liberal area of the state into a more conservative area of the state, certainly more California conservative. It's not like rural Texas conservative or southern Mississippi conservative, but certainly it's taken what was a reddish area and made it much more purple. And, these congressional districts here in the Central Valley of California are going to be bellwethers for years to come.
A battleground. That's what we refer to it as a lot. And I also wonder, how much the college demographics play into it, because Stanislaus State has only grown in the past decade, and we have students coming to school in Turlock from all over District 10. Really, it's a commuter college. So I wonder, given the data behind, college and their party preference, I always wonder how much of a factor that plays into what we've seen here in the past 10 years as well.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think from my point of view, I think it would matter if a race was close. I mean, every drop in the bucket matters, and, as Turkey Tech,
right.
That's the nickname we have as locals around here for Stanislaus State, because, in fact, it was built on a turkey farm before it was a university, and Stan State, Turkey Tech, undefeated in football, right?
Yes.
Because they've never lost a football game in history.
Yeah, because they don't have a football team, for those who don't know.
but my point is that the facts are this simple, that as Stanislaus State grows in population over time, it is going to be better for local Democrats in Turlock and for Democrats who run in overlapping legislative districts. in the Turlock area, and that's just plain demographics.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I don't know if you saw the recent stories about, I'm sure you did, the ballot boxes popping up around California, which is basically, you know, the Republicans' way to harvest ballots. And, you know, Democratic campaigns have been placing those boxes on college campuses.
I'm really glad you brought this up, because I wasn't going to bring it up in this podcast. It's something we're definitely going to talk about next Saturday. But I'm really glad you did bring this up, because this has been a story all week in the state of California where, you know, Republicans have been getting slapped in the face for doing these ballot boxes and ballot harvesting. And really, I mean, really, like, there's a lot of irony here, because Republicans in California especially are always like 2 years behind the Democrats. The Democrats find an innovative way to do something technologically, or like with this ballot harvesting. And for those of you that don't know, ballot harvesting is essentially you can go and pick up someone else's mail-in ballot and turn it in for them. That's essentially what ballot harvesting is. I'm not going to go into all the details, but that's the basics.
There are a lot of loopholes.
Right, exactly. And it's just so convoluted and complicated, this ballot harvesting law in California, that we don't have the time to go into it tonight. But, you know, basically, you know, what Republicans are doing is you could like take basically Jane Sue can take her shoebox to her local congregation at the church with her Bible study group and say, hey, we all think the same way politically. Give me your ballots. I will sign for them, and then I will turn them in. It becomes illegal if you refuse to turn in Barbara James's ballot because she's the token Democrat in your Bible study group, and you know she's voting for the other person. So you turn in everyone else's ballot, but then you throw Barbara James's ballot in the trash can. So me personally, I think it's ironic that Republicans have finally started doing ballot harvesting, and they get a cease and desist order from the Attorney General of California, who is a Democrat. And Democrats have been doing ballot harvesting on college campuses and other with unions and this other stuff to high effect in their advantage for a couple years now, and to their success. And they're not cheating either. It's the law in California. It's legal. So I don't think these investigations are going to lead to any indictments. I don't think anyone broke the law or they're going to go to jail here. But you know, where I will say this, where I do think Republicans went too far in some cases, not in all cases, but in some of these cases where I think Republicans went too far is when they put the word official ballot box on these things, or they put the logo of a county or the state of California on it. That was a bridge too far, in my opinion.
Right. That's fraudulent, you know, but when I wrote this story and wrote about these unauthorized ballot boxes, you know, my first thought was, what a dumb law to allow someone else to turn in your ballot in the first place, personally, because that just opens up a whole can of worms.
Right. I mean, because if you know, Jane Sue takes Barbara Jones's ballot and then they get into a fight, and then one accuses the other of not turning it in, or maybe she never picked up that person's ballot, it just becomes he said, she said. It gets crazy. You're absolutely right, and I thank you for bringing it up, because it's been on my mind all week, and I'm definitely going to have a lot to say about this next Saturday in our podcast next Saturday.
Oh, I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say about it.
Yeah, suffice it to say, I am going to have a lot to say about it. But let's transition just a little bit, because you're on the ground. You're on the ground covering these close races, and the California Republican Party, I feel like, puts out an email every day with the title the path back to the House of Representatives runs through California, and certainly that would mean the seats that fell to Democrats in the Central Valley in 2018, seats like the 10th Congressional District, which you cover and we've already talked about, where Democrat Josh Harder is defending against Republican challenger Ted Howes, who is a former Turlock City Councilman, the California 21st, where T.J. Cox, the current Democrat congressman, defeated David Valadao, who is running again for that seat. So it's a rematch. And that seat runs pretty much down the I-5 corridor from Fresno to Bakersfield. And that was an extremely close race. So that will be an interesting one to watch. And then, of course, the California 25th, which sits in the northern L.A. County Grapevine area. And that one's different because it was a seat the Democrats took in 2018. That was the Katie Hill seat. She resigned due to scandal. And then a couple months ago, we had an open special election during the primary here in California, and a Republican, Mike Garcia, is like the first Republican since, I don't know, the beginning of time to capture a Democrat seat back in this state. And now he's got to find out if he's going to be able to hold on against the person he just beat in the special election, Democrat State Assemblywoman Christy Smith. Can he hold on to that win that he had with a higher turnout in a presidential election? And, so I want to get your view, because you're seeing it at ground level. But, I mean, certainly from 30,000 feet where we're looking at it, it looks even meaner, more nasty, more polarized out there now than even 2018 or 2016. So, what is your view with you being on the ground out there?
Yeah, the Central Valley right now, and especially like after what we saw in 2018 with the districts that were flipped, it's kind of a microcosm for the rest of the country, in that it's a little bit purple, where we're more used to seeing a red area. And in District 10, that's where I have the most eyes and ears, whether it be through people I know or, what I'm seeing on social media. I wouldn't say this race is a shoo-in as some people think it might be. Just because I saw what happened in the primary, and that was, we saw Josh Harder, the Democrat incumbent, take home 44% of the vote, whereas Republican candidates as a total took home the other 56%. So if you're considering and if you're believing that these voters are going to vote along party lines again in this election, it's going to be pretty close, if not sided toward the Republican Party, if we're going off that 56%. So, I know there's been some scandal, and I don't know if you watched our Turlock Journal debate between Harder and Howes, which was a little different than the one between Harder and Denham in that it was live streamed because of COVID. But, there's a lot of jabs being thrown in this race, and what we've seen from alleged social media posts from Ted House's social media accounts that he's denied and said that he was hacked, being used by the Harder campaign. And then, they've also used some interviews that, he had even with myself back in 2018 talking about Social Security. They've used those in ads. So really we've just seen Howes on the defense, defending himself against these attacks. And we'll see what happens. We'll see how many voters that may have been moderate or may have been undecided. We'll see which way they go, I guess, after November 3rd. And then District 21, I don't pay as much attention, of course, since I don't cover that district. But I know that obviously T.J. Cox won his last election in 2018. And if we assume the voters feel the same way, he has a pretty good shot at winning again, especially with the heavy Latino vote in that district. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see what happens. And it's cool to see the Central Valley play such a big role in the House of Representatives and have so many big races here that could potentially decide, votes in the House.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head there, Angelina. I think you're right on so many points there. I think it's cool, too, that, the Central Valley has been the redheaded stepchild of California for so long, that we are getting some leverage and some importance by becoming this battleground. So I think that's cool too. But I think these three races that we're talking about here are going to be a good indicator of how the election nationally has gone. For instance, especially with the 21st Congressional District being so razor thin in the margin in 2018. And that race was so close, just a few hundred votes decided that race. So I generally believe that if Democrats win all three seats, that's going to be an indicator that President Trump probably did not win re-election. Republicans probably lost control of the Senate, and Democrats have probably picked up somewhere around 10, maybe more House seats across the country.
So are you kind of assuming that at least one of these seats is going to go red?
I don't know. Man, it's going to be close. It's going to be very, very, very close. Anybody who's following our model here at Election Recon for the House can tell you that California 21 and California 25 are tilt Republican in our model right now. However, and I mean this, however, I can't emphasize this enough, they are tilt Republican by the thinnest margins. They are some of the closest House races in our model of the 435 House seats. California 25 is tilt Republican by like a few hundredths of a percent in our model right now in the projection. That's how close it is. Razor thin, California 25. California 21 has consistently been moving towards David Valadao, the Republican there. And as you probably know, I mean, TJ Cox, the Democrat, is caught up in his own scandal situation right now with some financial situations, and that has really kind of turned the district in our model against him a little bit. However, it's still razor thin there as well. So, I think, listen, if Republicans pick up one of these three seats, probably an indication that the national race was very close, that it was very close. If they pick up two of those three seats, I would say it's probably an indication that Republicans more than likely held on to the Senate nationally, and President Trump's probably better than 50-50 that he retains the White House in that scenario. And because that would probably indicate that Democrats cannibalized their vote early. When the 2020 is so backwards, Angelina, when have you ever seen in the Central Valley of California Democrats win or be leading the early vote here in the Central Valley? And if you add up all the Central Valley counties right now, Democrats are winning the early vote here, like with plus 7.5. That's insane. So I think the big question is this a new high water mark? Are we seeing the biggest blue wave we've seen in modern times? And Democrats are coming out of the woodwork everywhere, and they're going to have this insurmountable wave vote, or are they cannibalizing early? And how big is the Republican Election Day vote? How many Republicans are holding on to their ballot and they're going to walk it in either on Election Day or right before Election Day? There's a lot of unanswered questions here for me.
Yeah, that's going to be really interesting to see, because I just read an article that in California, with the mail-in ballots being statewide, usually it's the Republicans that are voting early and getting their mail-in ballots out, as soon as they get them at home. Democrats are actually voting in astronomical numbers early as compared to 2018. So it's going to be really interesting to see what's counted election night and how that compares past years, and then, moving forward from election night, given what you explained, what we've seen also in past years.
Right, exactly. And I think a lot of the people out there writing stories about this and people trying to prognosticate and predict and all this, I think, despite that everyone keeps writing about COVID-19 and it's dominated our lives, I think that these election prediction people out there, they forget about this thing called COVID-19. And I think that's just kind of thrown the normal patterns in disarray. So I think really we're all just going to have to buckle up and sit back for the next 17 days and see what the voters do with this here. But I'll tell you this, I would much rather be in the Democrats' position right now with votes in the bank than hoping that my voting base is going to show up on Election Day.
Yeah. Have you seen a lot of Republicans worry about voting early, about voting in general, just because of the mail-in procedure this year?
Yeah, I don't know if they'd be public about it, but in private, California Republicans are in panic mode right now because they've never seen this before right now, this early.
Well, there's so much distrust that's being promoted.
Right, exactly. And that's kind of my point. Like, with the president of the United States, who California Republicans are still pretty loyal to, he's pretty much telling them You don't trust the post office, don't trust the system, don't trust the Secretary of State. There's voter fraud out there going on, and I think this makes Republicans in California especially pretty distrustful of the voting system. And I think we're likely to see, at least this is my opinion, I believe a lot of Republicans are going to walk in their ballots by hand on Election Day and right before Election Day. But we're going to have to wait and see.
Yeah, and during such an unprecedented time with the pandemic and, everyone voting by mail, it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, and just just to kind of finish our thought process on this subject, I don't think it's very likely, but if Republicans do sweep these 3 seats, California 10, 21, and 25, I can assure you there will be people throwing people off the roof at the DNC in Washington, D.C.
That's for sure.
But I mean, listen, if Josh Harder falls in the California 10th, it likely means Republicans have had an extraordinarily big night nationally, blowing 2016 out of the water in terms of success in the election.
I mean, don't count them out after the primary. And, I've, on both sides, the Democratic side and the Republican side, have never seen such enthusiasm for an election. And we've seen it with all of the early votes that have been counted so far.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we're probably on our way to some sort of record turnout. We'll have to wait and see. There's a lot of diverging opinions out there on that. But I think the trends, should they hold, is certainly going to lead us to record turnout when this election is done and counted. I want to close with this. I want to transition a little bit because it's been a theme of our show the last 3 weeks here, and it's a concern of mine because in my 10-year career in politics, not in 2008 when I started working in politics on the McCain campaign, not in 2010 during the Tea Party election, not even in 2016, which was nasty, in 2018, which I felt was even more nasty than 2016. Have I felt this hostility, this vitriol, this hate-filled society as much as we are feeling it out there now? I mean, just look at what happened in Michigan, where you had these groups, these guys, domestic terrorists. I'm not going to call these guys militia. I'm not going to disrespect militia people out there or do any disrespect other than to what these guys were, which were domestic terrorists who were planning to kidnap a sitting governor, a duly elected governor in the state of Michigan, put her on trial, and I guess execute her for crimes or something. And that's just something I never thought that I would see in America in the 21st century. That's something that you would expect to see, like when I was fighting in Baghdad in Iraq, in the war in Iraq. So, we've just seen violence up everywhere: protests, riots, businesses being burnt to the ground, just cops being shot, violence against reporters, against people like you, are taking up all over the country. What do we have to do, in your opinion, to get the moral compass of this country, our society, pointing north again? I mean, I'm very concerned, regardless of what happens in this election, no matter who wins, one side is not going to be able to just accept the result of the election and the will of the people in this country.
Well, it's just absolutely bonkers that we have to sit here on a podcast and you have to say, please accept the results of an election. That just goes to show the turmoil in the country right now. And yeah, there's just such extremism on both sides. And, if you look at how many people identify as far left and how many people identify as far right nowadays, it's more than ever before in history. And that has a lot to do with social media and what we're sharing. And if we're sharing posts that are fake, and if we're sharing posts that is misinformation, we're just contributing to that. So I think it starts with ourselves, holding ourselves accountable, making sure not to spread misinformation on social media and making sure not to, just antagonize people through a keyboard, which is a lot of what we see. And I think that's where a lot of this hate is generated. And I think that's where a lot of this violence that we're seeing is born. So really, if you can, just delete your social media.
Yeah, I mean, bad business for you and I, but probably healthy for the country.
Yeah, unfortunately, I get so many stories off social media. So, as much as I want to, like, I would miss out on so much important stuff that people need to know. But if I was just a normal person, it's just toxic. I think that at this point and seeing what it's done to people, I would just have to say no.
Do you, I'm getting the look here because we're going over time. So we're going to have to wrap up. 4 podcasts in, 4 times I'm over time on the interview. But do you think that we have an opportunity to right the ship here? Do you think that, are you of the belief that America has been in controversial, high anxiety, high, high division times before, and we've always been able to come out of it some way or somehow? Do you think that we're going to be able to do it this time around?
I want to be that positive person that's like, yeah, we'll figure it out. Like, people will become good again, but, like, how naive does that sound? I think what we can do is raise awareness and try and, spread happiness. I don't know, that sounds so corny, but just remind people that we're all human, and one of the foundations of America is that we're all allowed to believe what we want to believe. And, something my grandpa always told me was 2 wrongs don't make a right. So I just try and always be that right. And, if I don't agree with someone, it's just move on. There's no need to have the mob mentality where you attack people. And, there's this girl in Hilmar that after the Trump parade that they had there, she posted about it, and she was just attacked by all these people, and they ended up attacking her baby, calling her baby ugly. And, like, that's the most terrible thing you could do. And that's, like, the most terrible part of humanity is when we let our emotions get the best of us. So I think a lot of it is just,
I think it allows.
I think it really just allows these people who would never say certain things in public in a room full of people to hide behind their screens and their keyboards and act in a manner that's just, disgusting. And, it allows these people to, just be bullies, just be cyber bullies on both sides. It's really sad. I think you're right. And, social media has been a tool for a lot of good, but I think in many ways it's been a tool for a lot of the problems we find ourselves in as a society in this country today, perhaps the world. I really don't know. Angelina, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really do appreciate you taking the time to be on our podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Josh. This was a fun conversation.
Yes, I enjoyed it very much, Angelina, and you stay safe out there and continue to do yeoman's work for the people in the community of Turlock.
Thanks so much. You have a good night, too.
That was Angelina Martin, beat reporter for the Turlock Journal. Of course, she does a whole bunch of other stuff for 209 Media and the Turlock Journal as well. Again, Angelina, thank you for being on the podcast. We certainly enjoyed that. Going to transition now to finish up our show. We're going to talk a little bit about our model and the details of that, and then we're going to take questions from you guys. Questions from you guys who have emailed into the show, and that's how we're going to finish. We're going to finish the show henceforth answering your questions. So we appreciate those of you who sent questions in. Our model here at Election Recon, we like to call it, we nicknamed it the quadrivial model, and at its basic level, the Election Recon model kind of breaks down into 4 segments. Originally, when we started, it had 3 segments, but we kept the polls all point to one direction, and a lot of the data on the ground, voter registrations, primary turnout strength, early voting, all these other data points keep pointing to a different outcome than what the polls are saying. So we're trying to break through the noise, and we've said it time and time and time again. This is the inaugural journey, the first time out for this model. It's its maiden voyage, or its shakedown cruise, as they would say in the Navy, or if you are a ship person, a sailing person. So we don't know. We do have a lot of confidence in it, and we're not trying to hedge our bets there. We don't know how accurate our model is going to be yet, because this is the first time out, and we're just being honest with you. The dictionary describes a quadrivial as having 4 ways or roads meeting at a point, and that's why we've given it the nickname quadrivial. And our first segment, like most models, our first segment is polling data. A lot of people out there are critical of polls and all this stuff, but we really believe that show us something else besides your opinion or what you see. And I'm going to say it time and time again. Yard signs, flags, parades do not win elections. They do not win elections. Okay? Votes do. Votes do. You can't be somebody out there who criticizes us about polling and silent majorities and all this stuff. Well, the silent majority only shows up if they show up at the polls and cast a vote. And I would argue that people with yard signs and doing parades and being activists, that's not so much a silent majority, is it? So polling gives us a snapshot in time. Yes, there's a lot of elasticity in polling. Yes, there's margins of errors in polls, and polls can be flawed. Pollsters put some subjective touches into their polls. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about that. Okay. That's why it's only 1/4 or 1 of 4 segments in our model. Okay. So yes, we collect these polls, we average them out, and we rate pollsters. We grade the pollsters. So if we look at the historical accuracy of certain polls over the last few election cycles, and if a pollster hasn't turned up pretty good, we give them a lower weight in our model than a pollster who has been more accurate. So we're not just taking the data raw and then plugging it in there. We are taking a look at how successful or non-successful these pollsters and polls have been. And we understand it's just a snapshot in time. And we understand that the confidence in polls has waned over the years. But we still believe here at Election Recon that they play a significant and intricate role in helping predict elections. But because of all the natural inaccuracies that I just explained that occur in polling, or intentional or unintentional biases, we've tried to build in a buffer in our model that hedges against all of these bad things we just discussed in polling. Our second segment of our model is demographics and local data. And this is nothing new or strange. A lot of the political projection models out there use the same thing. Specifically, the local data and demographic segment of our model, we're taking a look at general economic data of every district, race, or state. We're looking at median household income, the housing market rates. We're looking at racial, gender, and age demographics and the trends of the voting of those folks locally, not at a national level, but locally specific to those races. The partisan registration demographics. We take Cook Political, I should say, their PVI index into account. We look at the poverty index, and we look at things like crime rates and stuff like that. And that all plugs into our model. And again, the influence of those data points, we take a look at how those things influenced those districts, states, or races in the last election cycles. And then we weight them accordingly. I mean, that's pretty much what we do with every segment of our model. The third segment of our model we call fundamentals. And this is where we're really taking a look. The three of us who work on the Election Recon project, we are election professionals at some level. We have all worked on campaigns, and we know what a good campaign, a strong campaign fundamentally looks like. And we want to make sure that a campaign or what the polls are saying, it's not a lot of hot air because close races are decided by voter contacts. Again, yard signs don't win elections. Voter contact wins elections, and that voter contact being able to drive your supporters out to the polls to vote, that is how elections are won. So we look at fundraising, independent expenditures, or PAC involvement, and independent expenditures is a group or a business, a company, a political action committee who spends a sum of money for or against a candidate in a campaign. We're going to look at media buys, TV, radio, print, and the importance that TV, radio, and print has had in past elections in that local race, district, or state. We're going to look at that campaign's mail operation. Mail always been an intricate part of elections, but it has more influence in some regions of the country than it does others. And we're going to definitely take a look at a campaign's grassroots organization. And is it strong? We're going to do the best we can to get real data on what's going on grassroots-wise on the ground. So we're always taking a look at that. That's more of like are they hitting what we think are the strategic or the tactical marks, to use military terminology, in terms of having built, and are they executing a viable campaign? And then the fourth and final segment of our model, what we feel separates our model and makes our model unique. And if our model is more accurate than other models in this election cycle, it's going to be because of this, we believe. And we call it the environmental data, our environmentals for short. We understand that's not a real word, but that's the nickname we give it, the environmentals. And basically what we're looking at there is voter registration data, the early vote data. We do vote goals like every campaign should be doing for their campaigns, and that takes an exorbitant amount of time for us here. And what that is a vote goal is basically a spreadsheet that breaks down the last last X amount of elections, and it gives you a projected vote goal to hit. How many votes do you need to be assured or reasonably assured of a 50% plus one vote victory? And we break that down. We look at primary turnout strength data from the primary elections and for general elections, which we're in right now. So our model would not have that for a primary election projection, obviously, because there's not a pre-primary primary. And we look at what we call the SEIU factors. No relation to the union SEIU, but SEIU in our model is an acronym because we're all military people and we know how veterans and military folk love our acronyms. So SEIU is short for scandal, enthusiasm, incumbency, and unrest, because we know these four factors play a role in determining elections. There is sometimes being an incumbent can be helpful. Sometimes it could be hurtful. We look at what the polls are telling us and what the data on the ground is telling us in terms of voter registration and the early vote on the enthusiasm for a certain candidate or party or whatever and whatnot in every race. We know that scandal affects races, and we're going to take a look historically, if we can, if that data exists, how scandals have previously affected that region of the country and how voters in that region or that area of the state or race, how scandals affected, how influential they were into the outcome. And then not all scandals are the same. You know, is it a sex scandal? Is it a financial scandal? Is there criminality involved? All that kind of goes in. And then unrest. We know that unrest, protests, high crime, all this stuff, hostile activism, not activism in general, but hostile activism plays a role in correlation and into the final turnout. So all those are factored into our model. And then we plug it in, and then we run simulations, and we take the average out of the simulations, and it gives us the result. And basically what we do is we then take the averages out of our model, and like all the other models out there, we have a projection of what we believe the vote will be once all votes are counted. That's very important, because what the vote looks like on election day when the media outlets start calling races, that's never how it ends up. The winning candidate may have thousands and thousands more votes before all the final votes, provisionals, late votes, all that are counted, or the race may tighten significantly. So what we're saying is our projection is when all things are said and done, elections have been certified, everyone's signed off, and this is the absolute final result. That is what our model is predicting. And we have changed a little bit here in this reset that we did this past week of how we rate. It's still tilt, lean, likely, and safe, but it used to be 0 to 1.5% for a tilt. We've changed that to 0 to 3%. So 0% to 3% difference in the projection between two candidates in a given race. That is a tilt. 3.1% to 6% is a lean. 6.1 to 9.9% is a likely, and 10% or better is safe now in our model. And we've just felt that there were just too many rating changes because of how we were scaling our rating changes. But so we made that change here in the last week. But basically, that's how our model breaks down. I mean, we'll give you the ingredients of our recipe, but like master chefs who are protective of how they do the cooking, we want to, that's ours. If we're right, then we want to hold on to this model and move on with it. And we want to see if our model, our way of thinking here at Election Recon, can be helpful in accurately projecting elections in the future. So that's pretty much the detailed breakdown of our model. And I want to take just these last few minutes here of the podcast to talk about what we're looking at. And what we know right now is 26 million people have already voted in this country. 26 million people have already casted a vote, and we're 17 days away from Election Day. That is extraordinary, and that is highly unusual for that high of an early turnout so far in the election. And a lot of the media out there, a lot of professional prognosticators are saying, look, this proves our polls right. This is a huge wave election for Democrats coming, and they may be right. We're not ready here at Election Recon to say that yet. And here's why. Here's why our model has, unlike a lot of the professional models out here, here are the reasons why our model has things a lot closer, gives President Trump a lot higher odds, a bigger chance to win re-election, why Republicans generally are doing. I think a lot of the models out there actually are pretty close in our Senate and House models. But I would say that how close the races are tighter in our model than most of the professional models out there. And it's for these reasons. If this is a huge surge election for Democratic vote and Democratic turnout, how come it's not showing up in voter registrations? Voter registrations have been historically, there's a huge debate on whether you should use voter registration as a direct correlation to turnout. But we do believe here at Election Recon that absolutely voter registration correlates to the end result on Election Day. So if there's this huge Democratic surge happening, why is it not showing up in voter registration data where Republicans are either keeping pace with Democrats across the country or they are exceeding all projections before this election began against Democrats? Generally, in the last election cycles, Democrats have been the voter registration kings. And that's different for every state and district, but I'm talking nationally. We're seeing a Republican resurgence in voter registrations. That's probably legacy Democrats who are older, who voted for Trump, even though they're registered Dems, switching their party registration. There's a lot that goes into it. But the fact is, in states like Florida, Pennsylvania, Michigan, as examples, Republicans are doing better by 5 or 6 digits. Hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, and hundreds of thousands of votes better in terms of voting registration. So that tells our model, that tells us that there is a larger voting pool of Republicans in some of these states than there were in 2016, where President Trump and Republicans had some victories. That counts in our model. Our model takes a look at that and weights it accordingly. So yes, we may have vote by mail ballots coming in early and historically, but again, I said it in my interview with Angelina, but COVID has thrown the wrench in everything. I don't understand the professionals out there, the media, who keep talking about this historic wave pattern when I don't think we can honestly look at any historical pattern right now and compare it to what's going on in this crazy ass year we call 2020. COVID's thrown it all up in the air. Is this record turnout, or is this just early record turnout? I don't think we have an answer to that question yet. Our model doesn't either. So that's why our model has some uncertainty, and it will come to a conclusion. We will have a final projection on November 3rd, but before polls close, based on the data that we have. Is this a new high watermark for a Democratic wave? Are we seeing unprecedented Democratic turnout? Possibly, yes, but I don't think we know that. I think saying that right now at this stage is subjective. Okay, we're seeing early voting data in Pennsylvania that would suggest, yes, Democrats destroying Republicans right now in the early vote in Pennsylvania by wide margins. However, in-person early voting has not yet started in Pennsylvania, just mail-in ballots. And we know that Republicans do better in in-person early voting in that state. So we're going to wait and see what that in-person early vote looks like before we start waving a blue flag over Pennsylvania. In Michigan, Republicans somehow, some way, are winning the early vote right now in the state of Michigan, a state that most professional prognosticators are out there saying is gone. Trump has no chance of winning. That may be true, but the objective data we have in front of us suggests Republicans are overperforming right now in the state of Michigan. But it's too early to start waving a Republican flag over that state, in our opinion. Here's what we know. Trump is strong right now, is overperforming in some objective data points like voter reg or early voting or enthusiasm in Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, and Iowa. And in all these states, a lot of the professional prognosticators have a blue pin or a blue flag planted in these states. We are not convinced yet. We're not convinced. Yes, some of these states we have tilt Democrat. Some of them we have tilt Republican. We're one of the only prognosticators, one of the few, there are some out there, especially on the conservative side, but we're one of the few prognosticators out there that have Arizona tilt red right now for Donald Trump. And we just flipped yesterday North Carolina back towards Donald Trump. A lot of people have Biden winning Georgia. We still have that state in Donald Trump's category. Florida's very close. Michigan's very close. Wisconsin's very close. Iowa is a state that has consistently been tilt Trump in our model. Biden is overperforming baseline projections in Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Maine, Colorado. So it's not we're not putting our thumb on one side of the political spectrum or the other. We're seeing empirical objective data showing a stronger situation there for Biden and the Democrats in the states I just mentioned. And the popular vote is clearly going to be run. Our model suggests that the popular vote is being run up for Biden and the Democrats in California, Illinois, and New York. So, I think 17 days out, I don't think, I think a lot of these professional prognosticators out there who are planting the flag for Joe Biden, they're premature. And yes, with all the data in, I would much rather be in the Democrats' position tonight than I would be Republicans. But that's no guarantee Republicans don't make a 2016 run late in the election like they did 4 years ago. And anybody who says this race is over is insane, and they're lying to you, or they don't know what they're talking about. That's what we believe here at Election Recon. Our team has so many different. We do not agree on what the election. We have strong opinions on how we think this election is going to go, but we're not giving you our opinion. We're giving you what our model is saying, and I hope you guys understand the difference. Our model, third-party data-driven. Yes, there's some subjective data in there, but that comes from third parties. And yes, we understand that third-party data could be flawed, but that's all we have to go on. And we are making our best scientific guess on where these races are going to turn out, but only you, the voters, are going to decide. That is it. That's where it stands. And I hope you have a better understanding of how we're doing things behind the scenes here at Election Recon and how we're seeing things and why our model is not as conclusive or definitive yet as these other models out there that are more poll heavy. You know, that's really the difference. So I hope you guys enjoyed that little piece of nerddom, geekdom here in elections. If you're an election nerd and geek like me, I know you probably enjoyed that segment. But let's go ahead and finish now with questions from the viewers since we're 10 minutes over time. This first question comes from Esmeralda from California, United States, and she writes in, with the early vote way up in California, and for the first time it heavily favoring Democrats, are Republicans in trouble in lean or likely Republican districts? We talked a lot about that, I think, with Angelina Esmeralda. Thank you for writing in. Again, I'm going to go with it's too early to say. It's too early to say, but I do think there are reasons for Republicans to have red flags in California right now. I think they should be concerned, and Republican campaigns would be wise to start pushing their vote out sooner than later. But too much data out yet. Are Republicans going to show up in an overwhelming wave on Election Day? I personally think there's going to be a strong Republican turnout the closer we get to Election Day, and especially on Election Day. But again, that's subjective. We're going to have to wait and see. Carl from Toronto, Canada, still getting a strong push and response from international listeners, and I certainly do appreciate it. Carl, thanks for writing in. Carl writes, do you think Trudeau's American ban for COVID-19 is affecting the U.S. economy or elections? So I'm going to assume you're talking about the travel ban, that Americans cannot travel to Canada right now due to COVID-19. Do I think it's bad for the U.S. economy, or do I think it's affecting the elections? I don't really think it has that big of an effect on the American election. I don't think that would rank in people's top 10 focuses or concerns right now in the American voter's mind. Is it hurting the U.S. economy? Probably a little bit. I'm not an economist, but I would be willing to guess it's hurting your economy in Canada way more than it's hurting ours. I think a lot of the world, especially the countries that border our country like yours, depend on American tourism quite a bit. So I would imagine if you asked businesses who depend on tourism right across the border, Niagara Falls, for instance, is this ban hurting their business? I bet you it is, and I bet you it's hurting the Canadian economy just because it's smaller than the American economy a lot more. Thanks for writing in, Carl. I certainly do appreciate it. The next question comes from Mary Lou from Los Angeles, California, and she writes, I am a UCLA student, and I love your podcast. Well, thank you, Mary Lou. We appreciate that. Thanks for being or trying to be fair. I can tell you are a Republican, and I am a Democrat, but I like that you're just trying to keep it real. Well, I appreciate that. There needs to be more reasonable people in the world like you, Mary Lou. Thank you for the compliment. She writes, my question is, are you seeing the college vote, students like me showing up in big numbers? I don't feel like enough people are taking this election seriously that are my age, and I don't feel like a lot of people my age are voting. every year we get this. The left claims there's going to be this unprecedented turnout among young people, and then it always peters out. It's always more or less relatively year in and year out, but young people often don't vote. That's just the way it is. What we are seeing is young women like yourself are voting in higher numbers. Young men, not so much. I don't have enough data yet that tells me whether or not young people are going to show up, and we likely won't know in great detail until the election's over. We're going to have to look at the data and go back and look and take a look and see if young people came out in these overwhelming numbers like we're being told, like we're told every election cycle. We haven't really seen it yet, ever. Maybe a little bit during the Obama years in 2008 and 2012. But for the most part, it's been an older electorate here in America, and I expect that it probably will be middle-aged to older voters deciding the election again. But I could be wrong. And good for you for taking an early interest in civics in your country. Sean from Texas writes, everyone in the news and internet keeps saying Texas is turning blue, but all I see when I drive around here is Trump signs and flags everywhere I go. Polls are fake. Quit listening to them. Sean, thanks for writing in. Sure. I've already spoken on polls and where I think the polls are, man. I'm just going to say this time and time again. And yard signs don't win elections. Votes do. I don't care how many. Yes, I guess it's a sign of enthusiasm, but it's not objective empirical data that I can put into my model, so I don't care about them. I'm never going to put into the model, we saw, 150 more yard signs in this precinct than anybody else's. That's just votes count, voter contact count. So I'll leave that at that. Do I think Texas is turning blue in this election? I don't think it's likely. I don't think it's likely. I don't see anywhere in the data that leads me to believe Texas is going to be statewide, a blue state. Though I do think Democrats are going to pick up a couple House seats in Texas in this election. Carol from California writes, why do you report 538's forecasts on your daily updates? They got 2016 wrong, and they are wrong now. Quit using them. We got a lot of these, Carol. Thanks for writing in. There's a lot of you out there who are mad at us for using 538, but I think I explained that in the lead segment today on the show, so I'll leave my explanation there. We're going to continue using that because we promise to try to bring you all sides, all news. We're trying to be unbiased. We're trying to just present the facts. Could Nate Silver and 538 be wrong like they were in 2016? Yeah, they could be. Our model certainly thinks that 538 is wrong, but I'm also not arrogant enough or naive enough to just go out there and say unequivocally that it's wrong. That's just not me. That's not my team. If our model is right and Nate Silver's model is wrong, then we'll say it. But if his model's right and our model's wrong, we're going to say that too. So that's why we're using that. Fernando from Virginia says, you and so many amateurs are dismissing all the polls. Biden is up bigger, way bigger than Clinton ever was. He is going to beat Trump, and you need to deal with it. Who would you rather be today, Biden or Trump, based on the polls? Thanks for writing in, Fernando. Yeah, I guess we are amateurs, me and my team, in terms of prognosticating the election and being predictors of the election. Our model, again, is new. We've made no secret about that. But we're not amateurs in politics or elections. So I want to be clear about that. We've talked a lot about polls tonight, so I think you know where we stand. I don't think that we're dismissing the polls. I think there's a lot of conservative voices out there that are dismissing the polls. We have not dismissed the polls, but we also are putting a grading curve on the polls. And our model is not completely reliant on polling data. That's just 1/4 or one aspect of our model. So I don't think we're dismissing the polls. I really think I hope that we haven't given a bias towards Trump or or Biden in any of these podcasts because we're trying real hard not to. Again, my team all across the political spectrum in terms of their personal politics. I can promise you we will deal with it here no matter what happens. We're definitely going to accept the results, and we're definitely going to deal with whatever those final results may be. Would I rather be Biden or Trump tonight? I said it many times. I'd rather be, if I was a Democrat political operative, I feel much better about my position tonight than a Republican political operative. And that goes for the Biden or Trump campaign. However, in no way is this election over. And we still think here at Election Recon that the race is tight. And we'll have to wait and see on Election Day. Thank you guys so very much for writing in. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Again, going super long, but that's the way that it is. We're going to try to get them back down to an hour. I know an hour and 20 minutes is too long, but we're trying to get you quality content and then, give you a good show to listen to on the weekend. So thank you so much for bearing with us again tonight. We appreciate you. Please like, subscribe, follow, share our content on social media. You can find us on social media on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Election Recon, You can email us at any time. You can DM us on social media or email the show at electrecon, electrecon@gmail.com. Write in, ask a question, and we may answer it here on this podcast. And please follow the podcast, subscribe to the podcast. You can find our podcasts at iHeartRadio, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We thank all of our supporters. We went up over 150 YouTube subscribers. Over 500 people are listening to the podcast every day. And, our Twitter and Facebook, all that. We thank you, everyone, for your early support of Election Recon. This concludes episode 4. Thanks for being with us tonight. I'm Josh Whitfield. We'll see you next week.